So we had a really good workout this morning. Coach Mike talked about David in the Bible, and I actually want to talk a little bit about David in the Bible too. Do you guys, who's familiar with the story about David? The reason why I want to bring up David is actually because I think that David is one of the people in the Bible that we can learn a lot from to know how to really grasp onto our own identity. Like, our identity is one of the most important things about us. Like, how you see yourself is going to color everything that you do. How you see yourself is going to color everything you do. And if you look at the story of David, if you look at the life of David, you're going to see a lot of examples of how he understood some things that helped him to overcome some big things in his life. And this is, I'm going to kind of share some of his story, like just little bits and pieces. There's a lot more to it though. And some of it you might be a little bit familiar with it, some of it you won't be. But here, who's familiar with the story about when he defeated Goliath? You guys know that story, David and Goliath? Yeah? Let me give you a little rundown for those of you who might not be super familiar. Actually, let me give you a little rundown of David in general. So David was a shepherd who watched sheep in the hills by himself. And during that time, Israel had its very first king, and his name was Saul. And at first, Saul was doing great. Like, Saul was this like good-looking, tall, handsome guy that everyone was like super proud of to have as king. And at first he was doing good. And then Saul's ego got in the way. He really, really messed up bad. And he totally disobeyed. I'm like really shortening the story, but he really disobeyed God. And God was like, you know what? You're done. You are done. Like, you cannot be the king of my people anymore. Like, you're done. And so God told the prophet of Israel, whose name was Samuel, to go anoint a different king. And who did God choose to be the next king of Israel? It was David. And at the time, like I said, David was a shepherd in the fields. He was a nobody. He was a nobody, like nobody of importance. In fact, when Samuel went to go, like, because God was like, you're going to go to Jesse's house. Jesse was David's dad. God's like, you're going to go to Jesse's house and you're going to anoint the next king of Israel there. So Samuel's like, all right. He goes there and he's like, all right, God. He tells Jesse, gather your sons. Jesse gathers his sons. Samuel looks across the line. He's like, it's not any of these guys. And he's like, do you have another kid somewhere? And Jesse's like, well, actually, there's this one that's in the fields. I guess I could grab him. And so he sends for David to come. And lo and behold, that's the one that God's telling Samuel, yeah, that's the one I want. The least significant person in the family. Like, there's a reason why the dad didn't call David to come to meet the prophet. The dad didn't think anything of him. He's just the kid in the fields. He's like the last born. All his other sons are like warriors. They're tall, they're handsome, they're like ready. They were the ones that we would pick. Like, people would pick those guys. They wouldn't pick the skinny little kid that's like taking care of the sheep in the fields. But God was like, no, I want him. That's the one right there. Surprised probably everybody in the family. But they got to keep it on the down low because Saul is still actually king of Israel right now. Okay? So I'm not going to get into all of that because it's like a long story. But I just want to point out some things from the life of David. And there are a lot of scriptures that are written about David, and then also a lot that David wrote, because David is one of the people that wrote most of the Psalms. You guys have you heard of the Psalms? in the Bible, right in the middle of the book, there's a book called the Psalms, and it's a collection of songs, basically. It's what they would use some of these to like worship in the tabernacle and all this kind of stuff. And David wrote a lot of those. So David was a worshiper. He wrote psalms out in the field while he was taking care of the sheep. And he continued to write psalms all throughout his life. And so not only do we have the story of David, we also have the writings of David too, which is why I think he's a really good example for us to look at and to see how he lived his life and how he framed things. If you were on the Wednesday coaching call, Coach Mike talked a lot about framing things. How do you frame things? And one of the Psalms that he played this morning was Psalm 27. And you might want to just write that one down because I'm not going to like go over it too much, but you should go look at it later. And it starts out, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? That's like the first line. Let me see. Do I have it written down somewhere? There's, no, I don't. He wrote that when he was being chased by King Saul and King Saul's army. I'm going to pause for a second. I want you guys to catch that. So King David, and I know I'm skipping a lot of the story, but he's running away from Saul and his army. And he writes this psalm that says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? Like, I ain't afraid. Do you guys hear how this is the program. Like, this is how we teach you guys. Doesn't matter what external circumstances are going on, you write how things are supposed to be. And in the present tense. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? So you kind of catch the grid that we're working from right now? Okay, cool. All right. One of the things though I want to kind of talk about is like, so remind me again, who here is familiar with the story with David and Goliath? Can you give me a little thing in the chat? Sandra, I see you're on the elliptical. You don't have to put anything in the chat. In the chat, give me a Y if you've heard of that story. Give me an N if you haven't heard that story. Cool. Okay. So let me tell this story then. It's a cool story. In that day of like that time period, the major enemy of the Israelites were the Philistines. And there's a lot of stories about like the battles between them, all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that made people afraid of attacking Israel was their history with God. Like, they knew the story of like how God had delivered the people out of Egypt, and that destroyed Pharaoh's army that tried to come against them. They knew other stories of how like they were like, oh, like, we're not just afraid of Israel and their soldiers, like, we're afraid of their God. And so that's kind of like what kept the Philistines like a little bit like checked a little bit. But they thought they were real cool this one time because they found a giant. You're like, this sounds like a fairy tale. But they found a man that they called Goliath. And I think in the Bible it says he was like 9 feet tall. And this is after David is anointed king, but he's not king yet. Like I said, they have to keep this secret because if King Saul knows that Samuel anointed David king, he's dead. So David knows he's going to be king one day, but pretty much nobody else does. And David's brothers are in the warrior camp of the Israelites, they're facing the Philistine army, right? There's like two camps, the Israelites and the Philistines. And the Philistines, they got their giant Goliath out there, and Goliath is just mocking them. He's just like, oh, you guys are too afraid to fight, huh? Like, y'all, where's your God now? Ha ha ha. Like, totally mocking them for days, maybe weeks, I'm not sure. And David wasn't one of the warriors, but his dad sent him to go take some supplies to the army, some bread, some food, basically. So Israel is like getting taunted by the other army. They're like ready to attack, but the Philistines made this deal like, hey, if you got a champion that wants to come out and fight Goliath, we'll like call this whole deal off. We don't have to go to battle. But nobody wanted to do it. Anybody who would try is like, that'd be crazy. I am not fighting that guy. Everyone's gonna die. Like, he's just this display of like, he's gonna kick your butt, basically. And so like Israel's like kind of freaking out. They're like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? Like, no one's gonna defeat this guy. We're gonna lose in battle. Like, where is God? We don't even know. So David comes, he's delivering the supplies to the army. He's not even supposed to be there. He gets there, he hears this giant taunting the whole army, and David's like, who's this guy? And they were like, that's Goliath. Like, he's like, he's sent to like put fear in our hearts, and basically it's working. And David's like, no. This is not how this goes down. Like, he cannot talk about our God that way. He's like mad. And he's like, is nobody gonna fight him? And they're like, no. He's like, I'm gonna fight him. And they're like, no, you're not. This is stupid. You're like a kid. Anyway, I'm not trying to spend so much time on the story because I actually want to like get to you. Basically, David takes a slingshot, kills Goliath with the slingshot, cuts off his head, and everyone was like, wait, what? What just happened? What the heck? Like, it is probably the pinnacle underdog story you would ever read, right? Any of you guys sports fans where you're like, oh my gosh, I root for an underdog team all the time, and when they win, you're just like so ecstatic about it because like they're not supposed to win. That's kind of like, that's a tiny bit of a taste of what this was like. David was not supposed to be able to defeat this guy, okay? So this became the stuff of legends, like there's more story to it. But what I want to point out to you this morning is one of the reasons why David was so confident that he could defeat Goliath is this. What he said when he went into that battle, and people were like, you can't defeat him. You can't do it. David was like, no. I watch sheep all the time. And there was one time that a lion came and he tried to get the sheep, and I killed the lion with my own hands. Same thing with a bear. Like, I've killed a lion and a bear with my bare hands. I can take Goliath. And nobody really believed him, but David knew the victory that he already had. David knew he was alone in those hills. Nobody watched him kill a lion with his bare hands. Nobody watched him kill a bear with his bare hands. But David knew that he actually did it. So when he showed up to that battlefield and he sees this giant taunting, he's like, when y'all gonna step up? And when nobody would, he's like, well, I will then. Like, I got this. He had that confidence. Why? Because he had past victories. Okay? And my point to this for you is this. David faced a lot of rejection. He faced a lot of obscurity. Like, nobody thought this guy was going to do anything. He faced a lot of he faced adversity. Like, genuinely, how many of you have felt or are currently feeling like this? Nobody knows who you are. you face a lot of adversity, and you're dealing with some rejection. Does that ring true to anybody? Okay. I think we all have felt like this at one time or another, and maybe sometimes it's more magnified than others, but I think that we've all felt like this. But when it was time for him to like take that next level, he didn't hesitate. And the reason why I don't think he hesitated was because of those past victories. He remembered that he defeated the lion, he remembered he defeated the bear, and he remembered how God helped him in those moments, and that God was going to show up again. David, like, he didn't walk into that battlefield like, well, I don't know, I'm not sure, like, if my training was enough, like, I don't know. He knew. He like took the victories, and he was like, this is who I am. And I think that there's a lot of the times that you guys do not take the victories that you have and you don't use them to help you form your identity. Am I making sense? Like, there's victories that you have, and maybe they're not like enormous victories yet, but I know you have some victories. You're here today. Like, you wouldn't have victories, or you wouldn't be here if you didn't have some victories. Like, being here is a little bit of a victory. You're showing up. You're counting your macros. You're doing your workout. Like, there's victories in your life. And I know you have other victories that have nothing to do with, like, before the program too. So if you don't already have a pen and a paper, I want you to grab one right now, because I have a question for you. All right, my question for you is, what are the Goliaths, or the lion and the bears, whatever? What are the Goliaths that you have already defeated in your life? What big things have you like, oh, I did that? I want you to think of moments where it was like really, really hard. You didn't know if you were gonna make it, but you did. Write them all down. Write as many down as you can think of. I'm gonna give you guys like a minute or two. Don't downplay them. So as soon as they come to mind, just write them down. Don't be like, nah, that's not a big deal. What Goliaths have you already defeated? They can be big, they can be smaller, but they're yours. All right, my next question, and this is super important. What identity do those victories prove? So what does that win say about your strength? What does that win say about your faith? What does that victory say about how you handle pressure? So maybe you're somebody that has like overcome betrayal. That would mean you're probably very loyal and resilient. If you're somebody who has like, maybe you came from like no money and now you're making good money now. What does that say about you? That says you're resourceful, that you're favored. Probably says a bunch of other things too. You kind of have to figure out what that is. Is this making sense? Okay. All right, how many of you have written your self-image statement recently? I know Ceci has. Recently? Anybody? Is there anything in this that you just wrote down that was maybe not in your self-image statement but should be? Sandra, I think she nodded her head. Either that or she's really into the elliptical, I'm not sure. Jose says yes. Okay, cool. I think there are two, the way to really know you, like, I really think that, like, really getting closer to God helps you to understand yourself. So I just want to encourage you guys, do not neglect that self-reflection time in the morning. Do not neglect the meditation, the prayer, the journaling, because as you get to know God, you really understand who you are and how powerful He has made you to be. Little story, personal story, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. But Coach Mike and I were talking about Psalms the other day, and he was telling me, what was he telling me? I think he was showing me how he's been listening to Psalms on Spotify. Like, there's like Psalms that people have made into like songs, or like they'll like say the Psalm over music. Anyway, and it reminded me of a song I had known a long time ago. And for those of you who don't know, like I grew up in a home that was like not a church home at all. Like, my dad smoked weed. He worked at a strip club. It was a little messy growing up. But when I was 15, I started going to church with my grandma, and I didn't stop. Like, I was so hungry to know who God was, and I read my Bible. Like, it was a genuine, like, I want to know God. Like, I really like sought after Him, and I ended up marrying somebody. We went into ministry, and I did that for 20 years until I started doing this about 6 years ago. So most of my life has been like in the church, in ministry, centered around that world. But in the last 6 years, like, you know, I'm not involved in ministry anymore. I'm not involved in that world anymore. And so, and you guys know, like, sometimes you forget about music from your past. But anyway, I was brought back to this song the other day. He showed me this song that he was listening to, and I was like, oh, I remember one that I used to listen to like 20 years, more than 20 years ago, actually. Oh my gosh, I feel super old saying that. More than 20 years ago. And I remember the house that I lived in, and I remember, cause like my oldest son was like little, like toddler, like 1 or 2 years old. And I remember, like, you know, dancing in the kitchen with him, and it like took me back, and I was like, I need to listen to this song. And then I ended up listening to this whole album of this one girl that I used to listen to. But what struck me, I'm like driving home, I'm listening to this whole album, and what struck me was how many of the songs were so identity based. There were so many songs that were like, there's one where there's the Psalm one, but then there's another one where she's like, do you know your worth more than diamonds hiding on a shelf? Do you know who you are? God has made you a shining star. I have literally not heard that song in probably 22 years, but I knew every word. And I'm like, this is crazy. Why? I'm like totally taken back. I'm not being indulgent here. I'm telling you this story for a reason, okay? So I'm just like crying. I'm like crying at this like whole, like, I'm like, oh, I remember that. And as I'm driving in the car, I'm like remembering, like, no, like for 20 years, there's been a lot of stuff that has happened in my life that has not been stellar, we'll say. Like, going through a divorce was not fun. You know, I had a lot of things that happened with my kids. I've struggled financially, amongst other things. There's been a lot of hardship that has happened in my life. Health issues, my sister passed away, my dad, like all these things have gone into my life. And in that drive home, I'm looking back and like, I felt like I had this like moment where I was like, oh no, you've been rich the whole time. Like, you have so much wealth stored up in the bank of like who you are and the identity that you have like held on to all of this time. And it has sustained me through the most difficult times, the darkest times. And I felt so incredibly grateful. The reason why I'm telling you this is because I want you to build wealth there. I want you to stack cash, so to speak, in your identity, in your relationship with God, because they are so tied together. If you start to seek God, He will show you who you are. He will show you who He is. He will also show you who you are. And as you do that, you are putting money in the bank. I'm not talking about money, and I hope you're catching what I'm saying here. You're putting money in the bank of your identity. I know who I am. I can face any situation, no matter what, and I know I'm going to come out victorious. That's why David could say, when the army of Saul was coming against him, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? When evil come against me, they're going to stumble and fall. He said that with full confidence and conviction because of all the cash he had stacked in his bank with his relationship with God. He knew who God was, and he knew who he was. He knew what God had called him to, his purpose. And I think, and I know we've been, this is like a main thing that we talk about, and I know it's kind of hard because you're like, but how? And I'm just telling you, you just have to try. You just have to do it. Like, there's, like, Coach Mike has some videos on YouTube on like how to do your morning process, you know, and all that. Do that. And then there comes a point where like, it's a relationship. You're just gonna have to like sit there, and you're gonna have to meet up with God Himself. You guys catching what I'm saying? Okay. Is that helpful? Okay. I hope so. All right. You guys are awesome. Just want you to know. You guys are all awesome. I'm going to open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take